Welcome back to the deep dive. We're really getting into the weeds today, and I mean that in the best possible way.
Oh yeah, we're definitely rolling our sleeves up for this one.
We are looking at a very specific slice of wisdom from what I call one of the most important texts in the visual arts. But we are starting with a quote that feels a little derogatory at first glance.
It does. It really strips the romance away from the job title.
The quote is, "An animator is something between an artist and a garage mechanic."
Right, a garage mechanic.
This comes from the legendary Richard Williams, and we are breaking down Chapter 7 of his magnum opus, The Animator's Survival Kit.
Which is basically the holy grail for animators.
Exactly, and the chapter is titled More on Spacing, which sounds incredibly dry, but as we went through the research, it became super clear that this isn't really about drawing pretty pictures.
No, not at all. It's about engineering an illusion. It's about the nuts and bolts of perception.
So our mission today is to unpack that, to figure out the nuts and bolts.
That quote about the garage mechanic is actually one of my favorites because it highlights a major misunderstanding people have about animation.
What kind of misunderstanding?
Well, we tend to think of animation purely as performance or acting, which it is, of course. But underneath that performance is a rigorous, almost mathematical, mechanical structure.
Like the engine of a car.
Exactly like an engine. If the engine isn't tuned, if the spacing isn't exactly right, the car doesn't drive. It really doesn't matter how pretty the paint job is if the mechanics fail.
And Chapter 7 is where Williams really pops the hood. Now, we aren't talking about key poses today, the beginning and end of a movement. We are talking about what happens between them.
Right, the spacing.
And just to clarify for you listening, when we say spacing, we are not just talking about timing.
That's a crucial distinction. Timing is simply how long does an action take? Like it takes 1 second to raise an arm.
Right.
But spacing is how does the arm get from point A to point B within that 1 second?
It's the texture of the movement.
Yes, the texture. It's the difference between a movement that feels heavy and leaden versus one that feels snappy and light.
And the central thesis of this chapter is essentially a battle between two opposing forces. Geometry on one side and the human eye on the other.
The technical truth versus the visual truth.
This is the part I found most compelling. Because you would assume, logically, that if you draw something mathematically correct, if you follow the laws of perspective and physics to the letter, it should look right.
You would think so.
But Williams argues the exact opposite. He argues that often the math is just flat out wrong because our brains process visual information in a very specific, biased way.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly filtering and interpreting the world. If you animate strictly by the ruler, you end up with something that looks robotic. Or, ironically, it just looks wrong.
So to make something feel real, you have to lie.
You have to cheat. You have to be a mechanic who knows how to tweak the system.
Let's start with the first major example in the text. They call it the perspective trap. And it involves a row of telephone poles.
Ah, the classic Ken Harris puzzle.
For those who might not know, who was Ken Harris?
Ken Harris was essentially the lead animator for Chuck Jones. He did Bugs Bunny, The Roadrunner. He was an absolute master of the craft. And he used to pose this specific problem to people.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, you are drawing a row of telephone poles receding into the distance. You have pole A, which is huge, and right in front of you.
In the foreground.
Right. And then you have pole Z, which is a tiny speck way off on the horizon. Now the challenge is draw the middle pole.
Okay, so if I'm approaching this like a draftsman or an architect, I know there is a geometric solution to this.
So there is a mathematical formula, yes.
I can just draw a line from the top of the first pole to the bottom of the last pole and vice versa, an X. And where those lines cross, that is the exact center.
That is the geometric center. It is mathematically perfect.
Yeah.
If you were building a 3D model in a computer, that is exactly where the pole would be.
But Harris points out, and Williams heavily reinforces this, that if you place the pole there on a flat piece of paper, it looks terrible.
It looks entirely wrong.
Why is that? If the math is perfect, why does the eye reject it?
Because of how we perceive depth on a flat 2D surface. When you put that pole in the geometric center, visually, it divides the paper exactly in half.
Right.
But because of perspective, the middle pole in a receding line should actually appear much further back.
It shouldn't feel like it's taking up half the space.
Exactly. If you put it in the mathematical center, your eye reads it as being way too close to the front. It completely kills the illusion of deep space. It flattens the whole image.
So the technical truth literally destroys the visual truth.
It does. And Harris admitted that even after 15 years of animating at the highest level, he would still instinctively put it in the wrong place.
Because our brains want order.
Right. So the mechanics solution, the fix, is to cheat it.
How do you cheat it?
You find the mathematical center first, and then you look at where your brain wants to put it, which is usually just halfway across the paper. And you split the difference.
You compromise.
You bias the spacing. You push the pole further back than the math says it should go, but not as far as a completely flat drawing would suggest. It becomes a felt position, not a calculated one.
And this rule applies to anything moving in perspective, right?
Anything. If a car is driving away from you down a road, you can't just shrink it linearly frame by frame.
You have to manipulate the spacing of that shrinkage to make it feel like it's actually accelerating away from the camera.
Exactly.
The source material also mentions this applies to environmental effects, like dust, which I frankly hadn't even thought about.
Dust is incredibly tricky because it operates on its own set of physics. If a car speeds past and kicks up a massive cloud of dust, a novice animator will almost always have the dust travel with the car for a few frames.
Well, because of momentum, right? It feels like it should follow the car.
It feels like it should, but think about the actual physics. The car tires kick the dust up into the air. The dust is now suspended. The car keeps moving forward, but the air and the dust suspended in it stays relatively still.
It creates a trail behind the car.
Right. If the dust moves sideways with the car, it ends up looking like a solid object attached to the bumper. It completely loses its dustness.
It becomes a rock.
Yeah, a weird fuzzy rock. You have to space the dust to rise and hang there while the car speeds away. It's about understanding the difference between the object generating the force and the medium reacting to that force.
That makes total sense. Let's move to the next cheat. And I think this one is even harder to wrap your head around because it deals with rotation. They call it the spinning disc.
This is a fundamental concept for anyone trying to create the illusion of volume. Imagine a coin standing on its edge, just spinning on a table. Or picture a carousel. And we are looking at it directly from the side.
So we are seeing a 2D profile of a 3D action.
Correct. Now imagine a specific point on the outer edge of that coin. As the coin spins, that point travels in a full circle. But from our side view, it just looks like it's moving back and forth in a straight line.
Left to right, right to left, over and over.
Simple harmonic motion. But here's the trap. If you space that movement evenly, if you move the point exactly 1 millimeter to the right in every single frame, what does it look like?
It would look like a ping pong ball bouncing back and forth.
Exactly. It would look like it's zigzagging. It wouldn't look round at all. Because in a real rotation, as that point curves away from you at the far edge of the coin, it is traveling mostly away from you, not across your field of view.
Oh, I see. Visually, it slows down at the edges because of perspective.
Foreshortening. So, to sell the idea that this is a circle, you have to cluster the drawings at the edges.
Cluster them together.
Yeah. You might have 10 drawings of the coin's edge all piled up on the far left, moving in tiny increments. Then, as the point sweeps across the middle, which is closest to the camera, it covers huge distances. Then it piles up again on the far right.
Fast in the middle, slow at the edges.
That spacing pattern. Cluster, wide, cluster. That is the universal visual code for rotation. If you don't do it, the object just looks flat.
And this is where it gets critical for character animation, doesn't it? Because we aren't just animating coins, we are animating living things, like a head turn.
Right, because a head is basically a sphere.
All right.
Or a melon on a neck.
And this leads us perfectly into section 2, the brainless in-between. This is a term Williams uses in the book to describe what happens when you let the map take over without checking with the mechanic.
When you just divide the distance in half without thinking.
Let's unpack the head turn scenario. You have a character looking left, that's key pose A. You have him looking right, that's key pose B. You need to put a drawing in the middle. The brainless approach is to just draw the face looking straight at the camera.
Which seems perfectly logical. Halfway between left and right is center.
Right.
But think about the spinning disc rule we just discussed. A face is mapped onto a rounded surface. If you just draw the features, the eyes, the nose, the mouth dead center, exactly halfway between the two poses,
You haven't accounted for the arc of the nose.
you haven't accounted for the volume of the skull. The source material actually describes the result as terrifying.
Terrifying.
Yes, because it looks like the features are sliding across the surface of a static head. It looks like a texture map shifting on a rigid 3D model rather than the physical head itself turning.
It creates that uncanny valley feeling. The eyes are moving linearly, but heads don't move linearly.
Exactly. So Art Babbitt had a rule for this.
Art Babbitt, Disney legend.
guy who gave us Goofy and the Mushroom Dance in Fantasia, a true genius of mechanics. He said you never just in between a head turn, you have to add an attribute. You have to dip it.
Dip it. You mean physically lower the head during the turn?
Yes. Humans rarely turn their heads on a perfectly level axis like a tank turret. We tend to dip our chins slightly as we turn. It describes an arc.
So instead of drawing the face straight on, you draw the head slightly lower, creating a U shape in the spacing.
That breaks the linearity. It adds weight. But there's an even better trick that Ken Harris championed. And this one is biological, not just mechanical. It involves the eyes.
The blink.
The blink. This is such a brilliant example of observation. Harris said, just do it yourself. If you look at an object on your far left and then quickly snap your focus to an object on your far right, pay attention to your eyelids.
I'm actually trying right now. Left, right. Yeah, I blink. It's almost impossible not to blink.
It's a hardwired physiological response. We blink to lubricate the eye, sure, but we also do it to break the visual stream during a rapid motion so we don't get dizzy. It's called saccadic masking.
Saccadic masking, wow.
Harris knew that if you animate a character turning their head quickly without blinking, they look like a zombie. They look like they're just staring through you.
So the blink isn't just a choice about acting, it's a mechanical mechanism to hide the awkward spacing of the turn.
It serves a double function. First, it makes the character look alive and organic. Second, it solves the sliding eyes problem entirely.
Because you can't see the eyes.
Right. If the eyes are closed during the middle of the turn, you don't have to worry about the spacing of the pupils. You hide the mechanic under the behavior. It's a magic trick.
I love that so much. You use biology to solve a geometry problem. Now, the chapter goes on to list a few other brainless in-betweens that violate physics. These are really specific material examples. Let's talk about the mallet.
Okay, the mallet strike. Imagine a character swinging a heavy wooden mallet to hit a nail. Key pose A is the mallet way up in the air. Key pose B is the mallet hitting the nail. Where do you put the in-between drawing?
Well, the brainless answer is exactly halfway down.
And that completely destroys the shot.
Why does it destroy it?
Because of acceleration. Gravity. If you put the mallet halfway down, you are visually telling the audience that at the midpoint of the swing, the mallet is traveling at an average, constant speed.
But a heavy swing accelerates.
It should be incredibly slow at the top as it changes direction, and incredibly fast at the bottom right before the hit.
So placing a drawing right in the middle acts like a speed bump.
It acts like you slammed on the brakes mid-swing. It kills momentum, the audience feels the spacing. Even spacing equals consistent speed. Clustered spacing equals slow speed. Wide spacing equals fast speed.
So for a heavy hit.
For a hit, you want the spacing to be massive right before impact. You want the mallet to be almost at the nail, just blurring into the hit.
The text also mentions a water drop falling, which is a great elemental example.
Same underlying principle, just a different material. A drop falling from a faucet. Pose A is the drop in the air. Pose B is the splash on the floor. If you draw a frame in the metal that looks like a half splash.
Like it's flattening out before it hits the ground.
Exactly. If you do that, it looks ridiculous.
Because water has surface tension, it stays a sphere or a teardrop shape until the exact moment of impact.
Yes. It shouldn't morph in midair. It should be a drop, drop, drop. And then SPLHH. The change of state must be instantaneous.
If you in between the change of state, you ruin the material.
You get sludge. You get gelatin. You don't get water.
This connects directly to the golf ball example, which really emphasizes knowing your materials.
This is a famous reference point in animation derived from high-speed photography. When a golf club hits a golf ball, the ball, which we all know is incredibly hard, actually squashes. It compresses significantly against the face of the club.
But only for a microsecond.
Right. And this is where the brainless in-between fails again. If a novice animator sees that photo and thinks, hey, cool, golf ball squash, they might animate the ball squashing as it flies through the air.
Or they might have it squash slowly over 3 or 4 frames while it's still on the tee.
Which would make it look like a marshmallow.
Exactly.
The spacing of the deformation dictates what the audience thinks the object is made of. It has to be round, then impact and squash, then instantly round again as it flies off.
The recovery has to be instant because the material is hard plastic.
If it recovers slowly, it reads as a sock rubber ball. The spacing dictates the density.
Common sense beats the chart. That's the real takeaway here. You can make a mathematical chart that says put drawing 2 right here, but if physics says no, you have to listen to physics.
Or, more accurately, you listen to perception. You listen to what the human eye expects to see, to feel the weight of the object.
let's move to section 3 of the outline. We've talked about spacing in terms of speed and perspective. Now let's talk about the actual path of the spacing. This introduces the power of arcs.
Watch your arcs. If you walk into any 2D animation studio anywhere in the world over the last 80 years, that is probably the phrase you will hear most often during dailies.
Why are arcs so fundamental to this craft?
Because mechanical things move in straight lines. Organic things move in arcs.
That's a great rule of thumb.
Think about your own skeleton. Your arm is essentially a lever. It pivots at the shoulder joint. If you swing your hand, it naturally describes a circle in the air.
It physically cannot move in a perfectly straight line.
Not unless you engage multiple other joints, like your elbow and wrist, to deliberately compensate and force a straight line.
So an arc is the visual signature of life.
It is. And the source material has this fantastic story to illustrate this. It's about a Hollywood assistant animator, really highly skilled draftsman, who was struggling with a scene of a horse galloping.
Horses are notoriously hard to animate.
The hardest. The anatomy is complex, the mass is huge, and the legs are doing 4 different things at once. This assistant had drawn beautiful individual frames. The muscles were anatomically perfect, the hooves were angled right. But when they filmed it and played it back,
It was jerky.
it vibrated. It didn't flow at all.
Yeah.
It looked like a strobe light on a marble statue. And James Baxter happened to be there.
James Baxter, who is basically animation royalty.
Right. He animated Belle and Beauty and the Beast. He did Spirit. He walked over to the desk. And he didn't correct the drawing of the horse's leg or the muscle tone. He took a blue pencil and he put a single dot on the horse's eye in every single drawing.
He tracked the passive action.
He traced the path of the eye through space. And the line it made was jagged. It was bouncing up and down randomly from frame to frame. The spacing was chaotic.
So Baxter fixed the line.
Baxter simply redrew the path of the eye on a separate sheet, so it flowed in a smooth, wave-like arc. And he told the assistant, make the drawings match this line.
And that fixed the vibration.
Like the penny drop. Once the path of action was smoothed into an arc, the horse suddenly looked like a living, breathing creature. It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is.
You can have perfect anatomy, perfect shading, perfect perspective. But if the invisible line connecting those frames isn't a smooth arc, the brain rejects the illusion entirely.
But in this chapter, you don't always use arcs, do you?
No, that's the beginner's trap. If you use arcs for absolutely everything, your animation looks floaty, it looks like everyone is underwater or moving in slow motion.
The source material clearly states straight lines for power.
Yes, contrast is everything. Think about a piston in an engine, or a punch. If I throw a punch and I swing my arm in a big, wide, beautiful arc,
It looks like a haymaker, like a sloppy bar fight swing.
it looks entirely sloppy. It's a roundhouse. But if I want to throw a precise, powerful jab, a jab is a piston. It travels in a straight line from my shoulder to your jaw. It creates a visual arrow.
So short, powerful actions often need straight lines, while long, graceful actions need arcs.
Exactly. It's about visual contrast. An arrow flying through the air doesn't bob up and down in a wave. It cuts a straight line. That linearity is what reads to the eye as velocity and intent. If you put an arc on a flying arrow, it looks like a limp noodle.
So we have straight lines for power, but how do we sell the actual impact of that power when it hits something? This brings us to section 4, and a really fascinating historical debate between Ken Harris and Preston Blair.
Yes, regarding the bouncing ball, this is deep animation lore.
Preston Blair literally wrote the book on this, didn't he?
He wrote Animation 1, which every single student buys on day 1. It has a step-by-step cycle of a ball bouncing. It's the standard text. But Richard Williams showed this book to Ken Harris, and Harris shook his head. He said, no, that's wrong.
What could possibly be wrong with the standard textbook example?
Blair had the ball anticipating the hit. In Blair's version, as the ball falls and gets close to the ground, it starts to stretch and squash before it actually touches the floor.
Like the ball knows it's about to hit the ground and is bracing for impact.
Right. And Harris said, nix to that. He argued that to get a real feeling of weight and a hard impact, the ball must remain perfectly round until the very last possible moment. It must contact the ground while it is still fully round.
And then it squashes on the very next frame.
Yes. Frame 1, the ball is just touching the floor, perfectly round. Frame 2, the ball is smashed flat against the floor.
That seems like a jarring transition, though, going from perfectly round to completely flat in one frame.
That is exactly the point. Impact is jarring. Impact is violence. If you ease into the squash over several frames, you soften the blow. You make the ball look like it's made of soft dough.
It loses its snap.
But if you go from round to flat in 1/24 of a second, The eye registers a physical shock because they hit tremendous snap.
This is the mechanic knowing how to tune the engine for torque. You want that harsh contrast.
And this rule extends to animating characters too. They call it the frog or jumper principle.
I've seen this mistake in so many student films. A character jumps and they just kind of levitate.
They just float up, the whole body lifts off the ground all at once. Harris insisted that you need an anchor. If a frog jumps, the feet should stay pinned to the ground for as long as possible.
So the body stretches up, the legs extend, but the toes are still touching the floor.
You are stretching the shape before it releases its energy. You are creating visual tension. You have the contrast of the straight lines of the stretched legs playing against the solid mass of the body.
And crucially, you have that contact frame.
If you lift the character off the ground too early, they have zero weight. By keeping them anchored, you prove to the audience that gravity exists in this world. It prevents that rubbery look where nothing feels solid.
I want to talk about the cliff example from the source material, because this feels like the ultimate cheat for impact. This is for when you want a character to really slam hard into a solid wall.
Oh, the Wile E. Coyote special.
Yes. Let's say a character is flying through the air, completely out of control, heading straight towards a cliff face. The standard way to animate this is frame A, he's in the air. Frame B, he's closer. Frame C, he hits. Frame D, he squashes.
Just standard spacing, even intervals.
And it looks fine, but it doesn't look painful. It doesn't look like a real crash. The impact trick is to heavily manipulate the time and space right at the very end.
Okay, walk us through the steps.
Step 1, you draw the character just touching the cliff. No squash yet, just contact. The nose is just grazing the rock.
The contact frame, like the bouncing ball.
Exactly. Step 2, you go back and you literally delete the frame right before it.
You remove a drawing entirely.
You create a gap in the spacing. So in the final animation, the character is traveling at normal speed, and then suddenly, in the last split second, he jumps a huge distance to hit the wall.
So he visually accelerates instantly, right before the hit.
Visually, yes. But the brain interprets it as a sudden, violent closure of distance. And then this is the real key on that contact drawing, where he's just touching the wall. You stretch him. You elongate him forward into the wall.
You stretch him before you squash him.
Yes. You pull his mass towards the point of impact. This creates a massive visual contrast with the next frame, where he will be completely pancaked against the rock.
You go from incredibly long and stretched to completely flat and squashed in a single frame.
And the brain fills in the violence of the crash.
The source material puts it perfectly. We won't see it, but we'll feel it. The audience feels the impact because the change in shape and position was so drastic. You are bypassing the optic nerve and hitting the nervous system directly.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Now, that brings us to the concept of speed. Sometimes things move way too fast for 24 frames per second to actually capture, and this limitation gives us one of the weirdest artifacts in animation history, the smear.
Or, as Ken Harris affectionately called them, long-headed in-betweens.
I love that name. It sounds so literal.
It is entirely literal. If you have a character looking left and you want them to whip their head to look right in just 2 frames, that is an incredibly fast action. That's a zip.
In 24 frames per second, 2 frames is less than a tenth of a second.
Right. If you just draw pose A and then immediately draw pose B, the physical distance between those 2 drawings is so big that the character looks like they teleported.
The eye can't track the motion. It looks like a strobe effect.
So you need a bridge between the poses.
You need a bridge, but you only have 1 single frame to do it. So what do? You draw the character, occupying the entire space of the turn all at once.
You stretch the head out until it looks like a distorted rubber band. You might draw 3 pairs of eyes and a nose that is 2 feet wide, all in one face.
And if you pause the movie on that exact frame, it looks like a nightmare.
It looks like abstract art, or a terrifying glitch. But when you play it at full speed, your brain reads that distorted, wide shape as a blur. It creates the visceral feeling of intense velocity.
I want to spend a moment on the history of this smear technique, because the source material brings up something fascinating about dry brush and how the industry changed. It wasn't always done this way.
No, it's a critical piece of historical context.
Yeah.
In the 1930s, during the golden age of Disney movies like Snow White and Pinocchio, they didn't really use graphic smears. They aimed for pure realism.
So how do they show fast motion?
When something moved incredibly fast, the inkers, who were unbelievably skilled artists in their own right, would use a dry brush technique. They would literally take a brush with very little ink and paint a streak that faded out, creating a soft, transparent blur right on the cell.
It looked exactly like motion blur in a live-action
It
photograph.
was gorgeous, it was subtle and organic. But then 1941 happened, the Disney Animator strike.
This was a massive turning point in Hollywood labor history.
It was a bitter, divisive strike. It permanently changed the culture of the studio. And right after that, World War II hits full swing.
So the context changes drastically.
Studio budgets are slashed. They're making propaganda films and training videos. They need to produce a massive amount of footage, and they need to do it fast and cheap.
And dry brush isn't cheap.
It's incredibly labor-intensive. It takes an artist's time to feather that ink perfectly. You can't mass-produce it on a tight schedule. So the soft blur died out.
What replaced it?
Inking became standardized. Solid black lines, closed shapes that were easy to paint. You couldn't physically paint a soft blur anymore. So the animators had to invent a graphic solution to replace it.
They had to draw the blur with hard lines.
Exactly. This is where speed lines come from. This is where the modern smear comes from. They replaced a physical texture with a geometric shape.
They started using hairpins too, right?
Hairpins, those little loop-de-loops you see in the air when a character runs off screen, those are just graphic symbols that tell the brain he went that way very fast.
It's so interesting how an economic constraint created a stylistic convention that we now just accept. We think of smears as inherently cartoony, but they were originally just a practical workaround for a lack of budget and time.
And Ken Harris took it even further than just smears. He developed what he called the invisibility trick. He said, sometimes you don't even need the smear drawing at all. If the Roadrunner zips off screen, just take him out.
Just delete the character entirely.
Draw him in frame 1. In frame 2, leave the space completely empty, but maybe leave a few of those hairpins or a stylized cloud of dust right where it used to be.
The cartoon vacuum.
Your brain sees the empty space and the debris, and it automatically assumes the character moves so fast they vanish before your eyes. It's pure subtraction. You are letting the viewer's own imagination provide the speed.
We've covered perspective, biomechanics, physics, and speed. I want to land on the final section of our outline, section 6, which is really about the workflow and the philosophy of doing this job. Because all of these tricks, the dip, the stretch, the smear, they require intense planning.
They require specificity. That is the word of the day, specificity.
The source material warns about a major beginner mistake, and it's basically trying to do too much in too little time.
The kitchen sink problem. A student animator wants to show off everything they know. So in a 3-second shot, they have the character jump, scream, wave their arms, land, and sigh.
And it just looks like a seizure.
It's completely unreadable to the audience. The source strongly advises, go twice as slow as you think you need. You need cushion.
Explain cushion in this context for us.
Cushion is the deliberate spacing at the start and end of a movement. It's often called the ease in and ease out. If a character yawns, you can't just snap the mouth open to its widest point in 2 frames.
They need to ease into it.
You need drawings that slowly open the jaw, then the wide yawn itself, then drawings that slowly close it back up. You have to give the audience time to register what they're actually seeing. If you race through the key poses, the audience completely misses the performance.
This leads to a fascinating comparison in the book between 2 distinct workflows. The rough approach versus the milk call approach.
This is a debate that still rages in studios today. The rough approach, spelled R-U-F-F, says, keep it loose, keep it energetic, scribble the feeling of the pose. Don't worry about the fine details, we'll clean it up later in the process.
The argument is, I'm capturing the essence of the performance.
Right, and there is definitely value in that raw energy. But Milt Kahl, who is arguably the greatest draftsman Disney ever employed, he animated Shere Khan in The Jungle Book. He absolutely hated the rough approach.
What was his counter method?
He called it the long shortcut. His motto was, I think about it a lot and I do it a lot.
Meaning he did the work in his head before he ever picked up a pencil.
He would spend days just staring at his desk or pacing around the studio. He wouldn't touch the paper. He was solving all the mechanical problems mentally. How does the weight shift here? Where exactly is the arc? What is the specific spacing pattern?
So when he finally put pencil to paper,
it was clean, it was precise, it was final. He didn't sketch a vague idea, he drew the final, definitive performance.
The main critique of the rough style, according to the text, is that it basically passes the buck down the pipeline.
Exactly. If I am the lead animator and I just draw a rough hand that is essentially a squiggly blob, and I hand it to my assistant to clean up and finalize who is actually acting in that scene.
The assistant is acting. The assistant is the one who has to decide exactly where the fingers go and how they are posed.
And if the assistant is making those specific decisions, then I, the lead animator, have lost control of the performance. This source material is quite brutal on this point. It says, if a drawing is out of place, it's not artistic interpretation, it's just wrong. Animation requires ironclad control over weight and mass. You cannot hide behind a sketchy, loose style.
Milk Call explicitly said, I don't leave assistants very much. If it's fast action, I do every single drawing myself.
That quote busts probably the biggest myth in the industry. People outside animation think the master animator just draws two beautiful key poses and then goes out to a long lunch while the underpaid minions do all the in-betweens.
But for the hard stuff, the fast, complex action, that system just doesn't work.
It can't work because, as we've learned today, the spacing, the in-betweens, is where the actual magic happens. If you delegate the spacing to someone else, you're delegating the texture, the weight, and the impact of the shot.
You are letting someone else drive your car.
You are.
It really circles perfectly back to that garage mechanic quote from the very beginning. You can be a brilliant artist, you can have a grand vision, but if you don't want to get your hands dirty with the spacing charts and the geometry cheats, you aren't really animating.
You're just illustrating poses. Animation is the stuff that happens in the middle.
Well, to summarize and wrap this up, we've gone on quite a journey today. We started with the geometry of telephone poles, moved to the biology of blinking during a head turn, explored the physics of squashing golf balls, and finally dug into the rigorous work ethic of Milk Call.
It's a lot of ground to cover. But the common thread through all of Chapter 7 is intentionality. Absolutely nothing on the screen should be an accident. Every smear, every blink, every single frame of spacing is a deliberate choice designed to manipulate the viewer's brain.
I have a final provocative thought for you and for the listeners to chew on. We live in a highly digital world now. We have Command-Z, we have infinite layers, we have software with tweens where the computer literally calculates the spacing for us between two poses.
It's undeniably very convenient.
It is, but I have to wonder, does the undo button make us lazy mechanics? Milk Call had to think about it a lot because erasing a hole through expensive paper was a disaster. He had to plan. Are we losing that discipline of the long shortcut because we know we can just fix it in post?
That is the existential question for modern animators. Just because the computer can calculate the in-between doesn't mean it should. The computer will always, by default, give you the brainless in-between. It will give you the exact mathematical middle. It won't give you the dip or the blink or the smear.
The computer doesn't know how to cheat the eye.
Exactly. Only the human observer knows how to cheat. And that's why the human artist, the mechanic, is still essential.
That's a perfect place to leave it. Hey, for everyone listening, next time you are watching an animated movie, go watch Tom and Jerry or Aladdin or even a modern Pixar film. Try to look past the story for a minute. Look at the spacing.
Look for the smears on the fast turns.
Look for that one frame where the foot is stuck to the ground before the character jumps. Look for the cheats.
I promise you, once you start seeing the mechanics, you can't unsee them. But honestly, it makes you appreciate the magic of it even more.
Absolutely. Thanks for going deep with us on the nuts and bolts today.
Always a pleasure. Watch your arcs.
See you next time.